Hi all. I'm Mark. I'm a sociologist. I'm in California and it's early. Um, but it's not as early as it could have been. So I thank you for waiting till the afternoon. That's really great. In the next 2.5 hours, we will talk about networks, social networks, and social media networks. We're going to talk about getting data, storing it, analyzing it, visualizing it, and reporting on it in a way that makes sense to other human beings. And so I'm very excited to share with you the work we've done on this tool. It is called NodeXL. You should all have a copy of NodeXL. And if not, probably now's not the moment, but out of this session, I am happy to help set you up with a functional copy of NodeXL. NodeXL, of course, is an acronym. That's the Network Overview, Discovery, and Exploration add-in for Excel, because we're geeky and we like acronyms, and you can't trademark an acronym, so we can never get into marketing problems with that. So NodeXL is designed to address a need by social science researchers, communications, information science, political science, history, education. A lot of disciplines want to be able to say something systematic and useful about social media and social networks, but social media in particular. And so the challenge is often those very same people are not software developers. So quick show of hands here. Who here is a software developer? Not me. Anybody? Software developer, software developer. That would be, we have 100% compliance in not being software developers. Okay, so you're my people because I am also not a software developer, but I know a few. And what we've done is discovered that there's a relationship between software developers doing what you want and money. And when you put these two things together, you can get software developers to develop tools that let people like us do things that otherwise only people like them can do, but otherwise they won't do it. So I guess I should, let me move you guys over here and then I should share my screen. And I think I share screen 1. There we go. And then I move you guys over here. Let me see if I can see everybody all at once. And that doesn't look like that. Oh, yeah. Well, let's see if I can see all of you. Okay, there we go. So let's see. A couple of really important URLs, and I'll be dropping them into the chat as well. And I'll also be linking you to Dropbox links for all the slides. So if you are interested in the slides, you will be able to get them. And let me just throw a couple more of those links into the chat. There's another one, and here's another one. So another quick question, how much are you all just already comfortable with the idea of networks? So if I say vertex, edge, cluster, group, centrality, who would like to hear more about what those things mean, or who would prefer, I guess let me frame it in the form of a question. Who would like to skip all of that and get on to how do I use NodeXL? Okay, so skip, 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 skip. Anybody? No, 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 I wanted the definition of a vertex. Okay, I can't see everybody's hands, but I'm assuming move on with it is the answer. Okay, I can do that for you. Let me share a couple more links and then we're going to jump right to it. So in the chat, and I think I'm typing into the chat here, could you all perhaps type in something like a hashtag or a URL or a topic or a phrase that defines the topic of interest for your research? And so I'll just get a little list here of Doesn't have to be the only topic, could be a topic, ballpark. Some people are interested in immigration, or they're interested in political extremism. Anything
Okay,
you
so
like.
you want
It'll
to
give me
know
a sense
like,
of topics that I should focus on. And go ahead. I'm sorry, is that a comment?
sorry, yeah, I just had a
Oh.
question if you wanted to know about our interest for like of the 6 projects that we're working on, or like literally our interest, like what
Your
we
literal
look
interests.
at.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be the 6 projects. It can be, but I'm looking for a quick list of topics that will help me avoid the other topics that are not interesting. Yeah. So whatever, and it's not a binding commitment. You're allowed to change your mind at any moment. So while you're doing that, political extremism. What do you,
Yes.
what do you know?
You just mentioned, and far right, far left, how political groups behave on Twitter, on Facebook. These are my research interests, but of course I'm open to any
Very
others.
good. Well, and nice to meet you, Gizem.
Nice to meet you, Marc.
We're gonna do just that. The only challenge is, can we even find any political extremism on the internet? It's so hard to find.
It is. I don't know. It depends on where you get your networks, right? From the users, political users, or.
I think that was a bad effort at irony, but we'll do a quick look at this, and then we're going to do this really quickly. So everybody knows that there are different ways of measuring a network, and that degree is how many connections you've got. But in a lot of our discussions today, we're going to look at this metric, which is centrality. And I'm going to make the sociological argument that centrality is a really good proxy for this thing we're looking for in social networks, which is influence. We're trying to find the people who are the super spreaders, the thought leaders, the agenda setters, the topic setters. And it will turn out that there are only a very few of these people who are at the center of these networks. And so one of the things that we're going to do is use NodeXL to calculate a range of network metrics. And then we're going to rank people based on these network metrics in a way to figure out who's more important by some definitions of importance. So, okay, and public information, planet or plastic. Okay, so plastic and digital culture, and we've got some STEM and some climate change. This is all good stuff, and all very well covered in social media. Let me then do a quick review then. This is basically what we're going to try to do for you in an automated way. We're going to combine these levels of analysis. There will be network analysis. We will treat each entity as potentially part of an edge. And we're going to treat these collections of edges, these collections of connections, as an emergent structure. And then we will analyze content. And so I just want to stress that ordering. Content soon, not first. So what's first? Connection, then cluster, then content. And so as a sociologist, my interest is in finding a way to understand relationships more than mere language use. And so a common approach is to say, I have 10,000 tweets, I have 10,000 messages, I will shake them up and do a frequency analysis, which is fine. What we will do is say, I have 10,000 tweets, these represent maybe 10,000, maybe more connections between entities, between me and the person I retweeted, the person I replied to, the person I mentioned. And so these lines, connections, are encoded in the text. And when I have a bunch of connections, what I often find is that they emerge into cluster. So from the atom comes a molecule, and from the molecule comes a clump. And these clumps have a quality in sociology should probably move the microphone over here at my time. A quality in sociology called homophily. Homophily is birds of a feather flock together. So what we're going to try to do is first network analysis, then content analysis, then visualization and reporting, and it kind of rolls through a pipeline that goes like this. We have to get you your data, and maybe you have it already, and we'll accept it in many formats. NodeXL likes Gephi, it likes PIAC, it likes UCINet. It likes, for, you know, it's a network tool. It likes to make connections. And so if you've got .NET files, UCINet files, you've got GraphML, GEXF, GDF, we read those files and we write those files. So wherever your data is, we would like to sort of have a chance to sit down and chat with your data. But we are not a sort of data roach motel where data checks in but doesn't check out. We're sort of like a finishing school. Your data comes through, it improves, and then it leaves. So these are those 5 steps. I talk about the 5 steps. We're going to get your data, analyze your data, visualize the data, and then export it in a form that you can communicate with another person. So just to review again, there's an individual, this is a group, and this is the graph as a whole, the population. And so the 3 levels of analysis, the micro, the meso, the macro, those 3 levels are addressed in network theory. We can say people have attributes, it's true, but groups have attributes. Also true. And then the population as a whole has attributes. So we're going to be looking for things about that individual. How many connections does he, she, they have? How central are they? And then, of course, what words, URLs, and hashtags are they using? The same about the group, though. The group is sort of a meta individual. And groups are formed, well, in a lot of ways, but in this case, groups are formed when people have a density of connection to one another that exceeds their density of connection to some other group. And you'll see later that we offer you a variety of ways of clustering people, but one of them is Closet-Newman-Moore, a very common clustering algorithm. That's what you're seeing here. These are the Closet-Newman-Moore clusters. So network metrics, the whole graph, how many people are in it, how dense is it, how many clusters are there, all those kinds of things. So 3 broad resolutions, the individual, the group, the graph, enabled by network analysis. So that on your screen is the menu. And so if you open up NodeXL, you'll see that there's a ribbon, and we have inserted ourselves at the end of the Excel ribbon. And so one point to be made is everything you know about Excel still works. So NodeXL is Excel. It's just got Node in it. And so it lets you use everything you know. And so if you know about filtering, if you know about VLOOKUPs, if you know about conditional formatting, all that works. And I'll note that one of the most potent features you can use in Excel is insert column. And we'll talk about that towards the end, but this is when you're going to bring in some attribute of, let's say, a vertex that you have discerned from some external data source. And an example of that might be, we're going to analyze the tweets of a list of people. And the list of people will be meaningful in some way. Let's say they are members of your parliament. And members of parliaments have they have many attributes, but one very salient attribute is they're members of a political party and they're not shy about telling you which one it is. So if we added a column to the list of people who are in a parliament and it in that column encoded name of political party, then NodeXL would happily group people by their political party because it doesn't know otherwise, but if you tell it, it's happy to do that. So we're going to talk about that. The other link I'd like to direct you to is NodeXL Graph Gallery.org. And this is a kind of Instagram for graphs. We could call it Instagraph, but we're not going to because we have no legal budget. And so we're not going to mess with Mr. Zuckerberg. But, you know, in the same way that people have Instagram and they take photos with their phone, and then what do they want to do with them? They want to show them to someone else. Well, we too are a kind of camera for the virtual world. And what we want to do is provide people with a place to put their networks. And when they do, they then get to share them with other people and present them on the web with a URL in a way that is a lot easier than trying to hand somebody a spreadsheet. It's not easy to hand somebody a spreadsheet. Or I guess the thing we've learned is if you hand somebody a spreadsheet, they look at you like, what did I ever do bad to you? And so they prefer, what do people prefer? They like slide decks, they like YouTube videos, they like images, they don't like data sets. It's just the way it is. That's my dog in the background, and his doggy mommy just left, and she's going to be upset for a little bit. So I don't know if you can hear the whistling. It's not me. Okay, just there you go. So I'm going to type in climate. I think that was one topic of interest. And then we'll also talk about political extremism. I'm an American. We pretty much, I think, invented it, or we've mastered the art of political extremism. I don't know. That's just American exceptionalism. But here we've got COP26 and World Resource Institute. And let me go find some topics where we are clearly on the climate change theme. We're also doing a lot of coronavirus. It's hard to avoid, although we hope you will. And here's climate change. Okay, so I'm going to share this particular link in the chat as well. All of our charts. Thank you. Oh, well, I'm going to get a cookie. How's that? Hang on a second. Are you really?
Now I'm curious to see your dog.
Oh yeah, I'll get you a photo of the dog. She's 9 months old and she has not mastered how to open a half-open door. And so she'll sit in front of a door with, she could easily get her nose in there and move the door, but she just does not have this idea yet. And so that was her whistling because she couldn't open the door. Okay, so she's out there, and she may get into the backyard and we may see her again, and I'll have to go look for the picture of the dog. But okay, what are we looking at here? This is climate change, the hashtag, and it's from January 27th. And we are looking at a lot of colored dots, and there are lines between them. And I see G1, G2, G3. So it kind of looks like it's chopped up into subgroups. And the subgroups have labels, and the labels have hashtags and words in them. And those hashtags and words are the words and hashtags used by the people in the group. And so what's going on here? Well, what we're seeing is described right here. There's a description, and this caption is designed to address what we think, admit, there we go. This is designed to do the kind of caption that maybe you would have to, because if you look at that image, almost certainly somebody's going to say, well, what is that? Well, that's 8,707 Twitter users. Okay, when was that? Well, that was Thursday, the 28th of January. What's the duration? Well, that's 2 days, 4 hours, and 21 minutes. All right. Is designed to be the caption that we think you would end up typing, because it addresses the where did you get the data, when did you get the data, what is in the data, how long is the data, how are the things in the data connected to each other, what was the organizing algorithm to lay it out and to cluster it. And so there's a really good chance that you are going to have to put this in your publication. And I know you could do it. You could manually do this, but you might want to do it 10 times. And that's a little annoying. And if you did it 100 times, that's really annoying. So how many photographs could you take if you have to manually annotate every photograph? So this is part of the approach in which what we want to do is make it so that you can take a lot of these pictures very, very quickly. And when you do, this report is something that you can then share with other people, in that not only is it a link that you could share, but this is actually a tweetable description, right? This is part of the closing the loop of the sociological data science system. This is, we took a picture of the hashtag climate change. What do you want to do with that picture? I want to show it to the hashtag climate change. How would I show the hashtag climate change that picture? I would hit the tweet button and I would tweet this to that hashtag. All right, I'm going to close the door. There's all of the summary statistics. This is everything that network theory in sort of a numerical way describes that graph. How many vertices, how many connections, how many of those connections were duplicated. And this is sort of the quantified description of your graph. And then this is the beginning of the influencer report. These are the people at the center of talking about climate change. These are the thought leaders. These people are the agenda setters. And how do we know? Because of betweenness centrality. We, you know, and you might argue, it's okay. We're going to calculate all of the metrics. And for your purposes, perhaps you want to rank by in degree, by closeness, by eigenvector, by page rank, by out degree, by degree. You pick. You're the analyst. That's fine. In this case, I'm going to make an argument. Betweenness is a really good indicator of the influence, the importance of a user. I'm hearing perhaps a question. Is that a question? No? And you're welcome to, just as you have, if you have questions, feel free. So then we're going to get down to, as you can see here, the content analysis. So it's going to tell us about the top URLs. It's going to tell us about the domains in those URLs. It's going to tell us about the hashtags. But I want to highlight something. It's not going to just report this part, the top hashtags in the entire graph. It's going to report this at the group level. And these are homophilous clusters. These are groups of people who mostly connected to each other rather than to other parts of the graph. And so these homophilous clusters are not all talking about the issue in the same way. They actually can have divergent orientations to the issue. And you usually see it in the frequency distribution of the hashtags used. And so group 7 cares about animal rights, but you know, group 6 doesn't mention animal rights, but it does talk about water. And group 7 does not mention water. But group 6 does mention water, but doesn't talk about animal rights. Group 5, electric vehicles. Group 4, nature-based solutions. Group 3, climate crisis, no mention of water, no mention of animals. And so Paris Agreement, group 2. And what we're seeing then is that there is divergence of orientation. It doesn't mean that they're in disagreement. It means that they ramify. They are not one conversation. They are many conversations. And importantly, at the center of each of these clusters, and we can kind of see that if we open this up like this, at the center of all of these clusters, we're going to see that there's really just one person who's sort of setting the tone, setting the agenda for that topic. So if we zoom in on one of these groups, well, it's just one person at the center. And we can go dragging around here, and we're going to see that it's mostly a solar system. It's mostly a hub and spoke pattern. And that has a meaning that is a kind of structural signature. And so here, I think I put the Pew link in there. Is the Pew link? Yeah, it's up there. This is an article that I recommend to a lot of people starting with NodeXL because it really illustrates the research application of NodeXL rather than sort of the technical side. So this is sort of the research output. And the thing that I find summarizes the report most easily is figure 3 at the bottom of the first page. So if you follow the link, I think it's the third or fourth one from, fifth one from the top in the chat, you'll get to Pew Research. You may or may not be familiar with Pew. They're a reasonably well-respected public opinion research group in Washington, D.C. And I see somebody asking for a link. And oh, you would like the Pew link. Yeah, I can do that. Hold on a moment. And I wonder if anybody in the chat could repost the content of the chat for the latecomers. That would be very helpful. So what are we looking at when we see this? These are 6 schematic images of networks. And these are 6 real-world examples of those schematic structures. And so there is a pattern we see frequently, which is the divided or polarized pattern. There's one in which everybody's all connected to each other. That's the community or unified pattern. There's the nobody's connected to anybody. Mostly people are not connected, but there are little clusters on the side. And then wagon wheel in and wagon wheel out. Hub and spoke in, hub and spoke out. This is celebrity. This is what it looks like to be famous on the internet. You tweet and a lot of people retweet you. That's sort of like an Elon Musk kind of a dot right there. But what about this? This dot connects to lots of other people. And I don't think Mr. Musk does that. This is more likely to be your airline if we ever fly again, or your cable company, or maybe it's like Amazon or the delivery service. It's people we have problems with and people we complain to or about, who then attempt to address our technical support issues by saying things like, hey, go to the website and type in the serial number and we'll fix it for you. Or, you know, back in the old days, we found your bag, go to the terminal and we'll give you your luggage back. And so these 6 patterns, we hope, act as a kind of Rosetta Stone when we come back to images like this, that you're able now to look at these and say, oh, okay, so these are like photographs of crowds taken from above, and not all groups of people form the same structure or pattern. Sometimes it's a marching band, sometimes it's a bus station, sometimes it's a cocktail party, sometimes it's a wedding. Of course, these days, you should never have 100 people in the same room, but that's another thing. In the old days, we used to gather and might again. And so when we look at these images, what we're trying to convey is an overview of social media that allows for the drill down, to actually go from the macro to the meso to the micro, to identify who are the people at the center of, well, there's Joe Biden, what do you know? You know, who are the people at the center of these discussions? And what we find is that it's usually not that many people. That the number of people who are at the center of these structures is less than 1%. And that's not that surprising because of the power law distribution. And so, quick show of hands, is everybody okay with the idea of power laws? Okay, that's one. So, you know, if we say, look, there's the normal curve, and then there's the power law, the key thing is that there's nothing normal about the normal curve. And in practice, in sociology, the normal curve is the power law, because it's not the case that almost everybody in America has a certain amount of money, and then there's a tiny number of people who have a lot and a tiny number of people who have a little. It's actually most people have very little money, and in the United States, there's a tiny group of people with an enormous amount of money. And so that's a power law, not a normal curve. Size of cities on Earth, right? You know, the average city or town is 200,000 people, but Shanghai exists. It has 28 million people. If Shanghai was a human being and its population was expressed in height, it would be a 300-foot tall human. And there are no 300-foot tall humans. And so some things don't allow for these extremes and some things do, and human wealth does, and celebrity does. And so there are only a very few people at the center of all human networks. It's really kind of remarkable how hierarchical we are. And so what we are really all about then is finding a systematic way of asking and answering this question. And that question is, who did what, with whom, when, and where? And if you've got data that is like that, then we invite you, I got to reformat that, to think link, to think about how A is related to B, and to think, is B related to A, and to ask the question, perhaps they're mutually related. You know, not all relationships only flow in one direction. A lot do, let's just admit. You know, there's a relationship, I lend you money. How often do the people you lend money to lend you money back? And back in the old days, there was the relationship, I give you a ride to the airport. And it was funny how that also went in only one direction. But there is also the relationship is married to, and sociologists have studied this. And if you find that you're married to somebody who's not married to you, we recommend counseling. But most of those relationships are supposed to be mutual. And so like, but they can be imbalanced, right? You know, you could get a call from mom, you know, 3 times a week, but you only call her once a month. And so there is a bi-directional reciprocated relationship, but it's imbalanced. It has magnitudes. And again, if you find you're related, married to somebody who's not married to you, we recommend counseling. So what does it take to actually encode that relationship, or any relationship? Who did what, with whom, when, and where, and maybe how? But the answer is, whoop, okay, stop that. Okay, there we go. It's really just one row of a spreadsheet. There's the who, the did what, the with whom, the maybe something we know about that person and something we know about the other person, and maybe the where and the when. So this is what it looks like as a spreadsheet. We have a column. We're going to call that vertex 1. That's the sender, the origin, the source. And we have a target, vertex 2, the person who got done to, the who did what, with whom. This is the with whom. And this is the when, and there might be a where, and there's a what, because there, in this case, it's a tweet. And the tweet has URLs in it, and it has hashtags. And so, and these relationships come in different flavors. There's tweet, but there's also mention, and I don't see it here, but there's also reply. And so there are different flavors of connection. And so the question, who did what, with whom, when, and where, what we're trying to do is just say, look, if you have data like that, and a lot of internet data is like that, but it doesn't have to be from the internet. It could be anything that you can derive the who, the with whom, the did what. And if you can put this data into a series of columns, then we're good. We don't really need the data to have come from Facebook, from YouTube, from Flickr, from wikis, from blogs, from email, from Twitter. It doesn't have to. It's nice because it was born digital, it's easy, but I guess one way to illustrate this is to, let me go find you the work. Work of Diane Klein, who is a professor of classical antiquity. So she reads ancient Greek, Dr. Klein. And let's see if we can find her. Oh yeah, this is the, okay, yeah, here we go. Using NodeXL to do social network analysis. She also did a workshop a couple of years back. But this is who relates to who in the life of Alexander the Great. So there we go. There's a NodeXL diagram. And Dr. Klein likes to say that, you know, Alexander the Great did not have a Facebook page. He was more of an Instagram guy. And so what do you do if he doesn't have a Facebook page? Well, he did get a whole bunch of people to write stuff down about him because he was like the great. There were all these other Alexanders. They were not nearly as great. They got nothing written about him. But this one, the great Alexander, he got all this stuff written about him. And Diane, you know, 2,000 years later, read it all. And when she read it, she converted each sentence. When she would encounter a sentence that essentially encoded the answer to the question, who did what, with whom, when, and where, she would write that down in a spreadsheet. She did that for 15 years. And then she bumped into Ben Schneiderman, who is a co-author of the book and a co-founder of the NodeXL project, who said, you know, that's a network. And within a few clicks, years of spreadsheet were gobbled up by NodeXL and turned into this. And this has turned into a whole new line of historical research where even data from ancient human civilizations can be converted into network data. And so I mention this because it isn't the case that it always has to be Facebook, YouTube, Flickr, Twitter, and whatever. It doesn't have to be from data sources that are internet data sources. It can be things like who transferred money from one bank account to another, who called who, which people in literature reference which other people. And in fact, way back when, in the dawn of network theory, there was this guy named Jacob Moreno, who basically creates sociological network theory. There was network theory before, but it was called topology. And Moreno starts off and he calls this thing psychological geography. And his main method was take Shakespeare plays and diagram which characters interact with which characters. And so that's really the dawn of social network analysis. It started with textual relationships. And then he realized, wait, the people in my networks don't have to be dead or non-existent or fictional. They could actually be people. And he then applies it to work groups and offices and schools. And suddenly these diagrams become, well, remarkably valuable. So let me just pause for a moment and see if there are questions. And let me just check the timing. We're into just about an hour. Let's see if there are questions. And if the question is, when are we getting to the NodeXL? We're getting to it real soon now, but let's just see if there are points of issue or concern and I'll just check the chat here for a moment. Okay. All right, silence is consent, folks. Here we go. So, all right, let me just show you that We are the Social Media Research Foundation. You can find us out there at smrfoundation.org. And we're on pretty much all the platforms. And if you say the word NodeXL, one of us will reply to you. So there's a lot of technical support opportunities. We also encourage you to come and visit us at smrfoundation.org. And in particular, I'll direct you to the About Us page, where you'll see that there are a lot of people from a diverse range of backgrounds, not just computer scientists, but also information scientists, social scientists, communications professionals, even PR, marketing, those kinds of folks. They are represented here. We do have quite a number of sociologists, and we've gone more and more international of late. We've got people speaking a variety of languages in many different parts of the geography of the world. And they're all sort of gathered together by this sort of phenomena, right? There's this sort of flocking thing going on out there. And it would be nice to say systematic and scientific things about it. It turns out to be challenging to simply read social media and then publish, because somebody's going to hit you with the big data stick. Reviewer number 2 is going to say something like, well, what about all the other data? And what about when you weren't looking? And why did you choose those messages? And I will note that even if you're really dedicated, how many messages can you read in an hour? I'm gonna spot you 10 tweets a minute. And so that's 10 seconds a tweet. And that means you're at 600 tweets an hour. And that means in a day, maybe you can do 2,000, 3,000 tweets. And what about the topics that you're studying? How fast are they moving? Well, a hot topic could easily be generating 3,000 tweets a second. Certainly a minute, no problem. And even a slow moving topic could be generating 5,000 to 10,000 tweets a day. And you might care about more than one topic. And so what if I think you have maybe 20 topics that you care about, and each of them is generating somewhere on the order of 2,000 to 5,000 tweets a day. And so you have 20 to 40 to 50,000 tweets that you'd like to have had some insight into, and you can maybe look at 2,000 of them. So we're somewhere between a ratio of 1 to 20 to 1 to 50 out of our league as human beings in terms of our ability to keep up with the content that matters to us. And so the machines have gotten us into that problem. So it's their fault, and they'll have to get us out of that problem. And so how could machines help us get out of that problem? My argument is that they could do some of the digestion first and allow us to focus what is clearly limited human attention on the things that matter most, that you wouldn't necessarily have to read it all in order to pick the right 1,000, 2,000 tweets a day that you could potentially read. And maybe you don't even read 2,000 tweets a day. Maybe you could just look at these reports and say, well, the questions I had, I can answer now. And so it's worth asking the question, what is the question? What do you want to know? And we would argue that you probably want to know who the leaders are. You want to know what the factions are there divisions and subgroupings? And what do they talk about and how do they compare? And that's what we're trying to answer for our users. And so this phenomena of flocking is very evocative, but I guess as a sociologist, I have to admit it's somewhat misleading, because humans are not starlings. These are starlings, right? This is a mummeration of starlings. If humans were birds, what kind of bird would we be? We would be chickens. Why would we be chickens? Because we'd have a pecking order. right? I would argue that no group of humans, you've never been in a group of humans that did not have hierarchy. You've never been in a room of equals. Humans don't do equal. We do hierarchy. Somebody's always more senior than others. And so if this was humans, some 1% of the birds would be deciding which way we go. It wouldn't be a kind of egalitarian democracy. And so what we want to argue is that a network view is one that really sheds light on the natural world, because the number 10 does not convey the structure that these 10 dots convey. Because 10 doesn't explain that Jane may not be the most important person in this group, but maybe Diane is, or maybe it's Heather, depending on how we look at things. So in network theory, we believe that we're kind of like the real estate folks. You remember the 3 most important things in real estate? Location, location, location. And then there are the 3 most important things in network theory: position, position, position. The where are you in relationship to all the other things? That's the important thing. And so the number, the volume, just the size of the population is not enough. And so if we are counting tweets, counting retweets, counting followers, that's like saying that 2 boxes with the same number of Legos must be the same thing. But in actual fact, one is the X-Wing and the other is the Minecraft, and they're not the same thing. So knowing this number, it took a lot to find 2 with the same number, but it doesn't tell you what's in the box. And so our goal is to answer the question, what does a hashtag look like? And let's cross that out and say some collection of connections. Doesn't have to be a hashtag. Could be a discussion group, could be a web board, could be Facebook group comments. It's really anywhere people reply to each other. We would like to draw a picture of that. And it is fair to ask the question, why draw the data? Why should we do that? And I will illustrate that point by asking you to look at this data, because we could do the big data thing, right? Rows and columns and numbers. So here are 4 XY coordinates, and I have questions. My question number 1, are there any errors or outliers? Question number 2, if you had to pair them together, 1 with any of the others, 2 with any of the others, how would you pair or group them? Another way to put it is, one of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Which one is it? And maybe you're thinking, but wait, what about, statistics? I got you covered. But Anscombe's a very clever guy, and he made sure that all 4 XY coordinate pairs had the exact same summary statistics. Numbers are funny that way. They can be different, but they add up to the same, or they average to the same. And so we're now almost a full minute or so into this. There's about 8 or 9 of us in this room. Not a lot of insight yet. If you've gotten answers to those questions, you can hit the raise your hand button or just wave or something. Anybody ready to answer those questions? Okay. Would you like to be able to answer those questions in less than 300 milliseconds? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. I'm going to change slides, and in less than a second, in fact, typically your brain will answer both of those questions in under 300 milliseconds. Here it goes. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, there we go. Now, I think the sound my brain makes is, oh, or why didn't you say so, right? If you present data to brains in this format, I can find the outliers or the errors. And I certainly can say that at least one of these things is not like the others. And at least, 2 and 3 are more like each other than the others. And certainly 1, 2, and 3 are more like each other than number 4. And so I'm gaining all sorts of insight in milliseconds. And why not use our brains the way they were designed? Because my understanding is this was developed in about 1606 by Rene Descartes, and colored dots were invented by shrubbery 4 billion years ago, or 150 million years ago. Human beings figured out how shape and color could matter. And so got a big hunk of brain back here all devoted to that. I'm all for using it, in part because I'm really bad at this. I don't do that very well. And my experience is that most people are not particularly good at this, and almost everybody's pretty good at this. So, so what would this picture look like? We're going to try to draw a picture, and these are the kinds of things that we want to do with the picture. We need to find who the influencers are. We want to find the factions. We want to find when was there a spike. And we want to understand the differences in content. We want to watch the content move. And of course, new for 2016, invasion and manipulation. And so, it is going to be difficult to identify when things are abnormal if we do not know what normal is. And so, as a sociologist, crowds matter. And what we want to do is recognize that crowds now form in social media, and in fact, should not form in the physical world, right? I mean, my mask is around here somewhere, but don't go out in public in crowds. But in the virtual world, that's probably the only safe place there is right now to be in a crowd. And so the question is, what does that crowd look like? And if we wanted to, we could read several thousand of these tweets, but again, in less than 300 milliseconds, we can get some really key insights into the shape of that crowd. So this is a political discussion from way back when in the Obama era, simply because, well, I guess I could update the slides now. That's right. I refused to update my slides for 4 years. So these are people talking about the former president of the United States, and they're clearly not one group. And we are not clustering them by the words they use. We are clustering them by the connections they form. And they form a connection whenever they retweet, reply, or mention another person. And that's when a green line is drawn between them. And what we can see is that there is group 1 and group 2. I have helpfully colored them blue and red, but you could probably guess the political orientation of these two groups by looking at the hashtags and words they use most frequently. And these are, things like forward on climate and Wall Street sales tax. Well, I guess I don't know if there are any Americans on the call, but in the United States, we have two political parties, a right-wing party and a far right-wing party. And so this is the right-wing party, and then the red people are the far right-wing party. And so we can actually see that they form subgroups, and we can measure the population, their sentiment. We can look at their word usage, and we can find their leaders. So now a lot of people have been critical of network visualizations. They say that they look like what happens if you drive your car through a swarm of bugs. And that could be true, but we like to argue that that's because this is a bad network visualization, not that network visualization itself is bad. And so it is true that there are many photographs that have been taken that are bad photographs, but that does not mean that photography is bad. And so this, for example, is the same network with a different layout. And so this to this, using that. And that is a paper that says, look, you can actually put things in boxes and separate the boxes, and that's a great technique. And we're proud of it, but it's not the only technique. And we continue to explore different ways of looking at these different patterns in network data. So here, and you can see the link for this up in the chat. This is the 3D rotating version, which is of course very cool because you can grab it and zoom into it. And in this case, what we're seeing is each dot is a, let's see, rotate off, there we go. Each dot is a person in Twitter, and each line is the relationship. I replied to you, I mentioned you. And the direction this way is how much are you in the center of the network? And you can see that the people who are at the center of the network are the ones that connect across the network most widely. And so that makes them the bridges. They're the gatekeepers. They're the linchpin, the keystone. They hold the graph together. Without these people, all these separate clusters would drift apart. And so we're interested in figuring out how many different ways can we draw these networks. And we think that once people can more easily draw networks that are relevant to them, then this network consciousness, this ability to think link, becomes more widespread in the population. And as a sociologist, I really want people to be network theorists, because if you think link, you see the world in a different way. It's not just atoms anymore, it's molecules. And it's true, the universe is made out of atoms, but it's in some ways more true to say that the universe is made out of molecules. You may be familiar with sodium chloride. Sodium explodes in water and chlorine is a poison gas. But if you put them together, they're a very nice garnish for my soup, right? Sodium chloride is table salt. So the way they behave when they're connected to each other is very different from the way they behave when they're in their atomic form. So we're interested in making these kinds of diagrams. And this is admittedly this is a cartoon, this is not data. And these 6 images represent 6 major technology companies. No doubt you're familiar with them. And they are trying to convey something about the culture of these different companies. And I spent 10 years at Microsoft, so I can confirm that this is the way it works, except that the weapons were bigger. This is, can Office get along with Windows? And the answer was no. This is the Apple under Steve Jobs, where nobody was allowed to talk to anybody. Here, the Oracle, the legal division is 10 times the size of the engineering division. So we find that amusing in the tech world. And so each of these pattern of dots and lines is supposed to, even for a non-network theorist, convey something about the nuance, the feel of a culture that perhaps no photograph could actually convey. So what we'd like to do is be the camera. We want to make it so that you could just sort of point and shoot. And there was a time when that was hard, and then this technology came along. This is the first easy to use point and shoot camera. So maybe we could upgrade. We can make it the sort of disposable camera. We could upgrade it again and make it the digital disposable camera, because these things are, of course, now obsolete. Nobody would actually spend money on one of these anymore because we have this. And so that's our aspiration. We would like to be like an app on your phone that lets you capture and visualize crowds, but virtual crowds. And so it looks like this. You know, you get, you're in Excel, you've got a bunch of spreadsheets, you've got a graph along the side. And so instead of bar charts and scatter plots and line charts, now we have network chart. And so it's all really driven with just a few clicks. You can go into the ribbon in Excel, click on the NodeXL Pro menu, and then if you wanted to get data, you would click import. And there's a list of different data sources you can get data from. Perhaps we're interested in Twitter search, and so we could click that and we get a dialog box, and you type your query here. And then you hit OK. And then you go get coffee. And 8 or 10 minutes later, you have this. And this is a complete set of worksheets, a workbook, understood, and a network that allows us to see the shape of the discussion for some set of tweets. Often somewhere around 15 to 20,000 tweets will be collected in a single grab from Twitter. And it, depending on the topic, might be merely minutes or hours, or it could be a week or more of data. And when we see this data, we almost always see the overall shape of the crowd, and that there's less than 1% of the population who sit at the center of these structures and are the influential voices on that topic. And so all of the interface in NodeXL is just a bunch of dialog boxes that you click stuff on and then hit OK. So these are all the metrics that we'll calculate. These are all the operations we'll perform on your network, including calculating all of the metrics about the graph and looking at it over time, and even doing sentiment analysis. So this is our word and word pairs interface. And in this interface, you get to define the list of words you don't want to consider. So these are usually called stop words or skip words. And then 3 lists of words that you can define. You can define the name of the list. You can define the contents of the list. We do ship with a default list of positive and negative and angry, violent American English, not even British English, but American English words. But if you don't like them, you delete them and put whatever words you want here. And these words can be in any language you would like them to be, with one little exception. That would be Chinese, because they don't use spaces. So if your language uses the space, you are welcome in NodeXL. And if you don't, we're happy to get funding to solve that problem. It can be solved, but we're not so great with Chinese right now. So these graphs and the reports up on the graph gallery, and I should note that that's a very optional thing you can do if you've calculated your network and you've got a visualization and a report, you might want to publish it. And we visited the graph gallery earlier, and you can, if you want to, put your data there. And when you do, it's really easy for other people to then see who are the top influencers, what are the top hashtags. And when we do this for more than one topic, you discover that different topics have different influencers, different hashtags, and that they also have different shapes. Some are more brand-like, others are more in-group, and many of them have this kind of hub and spoke pattern, where there's really only one person at the center of a discussion forming an audience around them, not really a community. And so it's worth asking the question, just how social is social media? And the answer is not very. Social media is often very much broadcast media, one-to-many media, and it looks like this. And we know that this is an audience and not a community because these people don't connect to each other. If they were a community, they might form something that looks a little bit more like this or more like this, where they're all connected to each other. But right over here, if a lot of people form a hub and spoke pattern, that pretty much means they can't be a community. They're an audience. So our goal, back. So this is what it looks like when you actually make it look like a threaded conversation. We'll come back to that. But our goal is to create a network of observers, each pointing at topics of local relevance and interest from all over the world. And already that is helping us see that different parts of the world use social media in different ways. So for example, there is the work of Ed Chi, who studied 5 million German language tweets, and he compared them to 5 million Korean language tweets. And he did a very simple analysis. He counted how many tweets mention another person and how many tweets have a URL. German tweets, 30% had a URL, and 15% had the name of another user, an @username. Korean tweets, 30% had a username and 15% had a URL. And so this suggests broad cultural and national differences in the ways that the same tool is used, and not to suggest that one way is the more correct or better way, just to say that culturally there is a broad difference. And this is not to say that some Germans don't chat and some Koreans don't blog, but that overall, Germans could be said to be using Twitter as a blogging platform, a place to publish links, and Koreans are using Twitter more as a chat platform, a place to interact with other people. And so you too could do this by looking at, for example, the difference between the word vaccine and vacuna, a word for vaccine in a non-English language. And you might do this in all sorts of languages and be able to compare the way in which different cultures are orienting towards the same topic. So yeah, very much our goal is to enable 1,000 flowers to bloom. And if you follow this link, let's see if I can grab that link. This is to Google Scholar. And this is where you'll find a lot of the papers that are published now. Let's go to Scholar, type in NodeXL. This is kind of how we keep score. We're looking forward to seeing your papers appear on this list. And you'll see that we're at about 8,000, almost 9,000. And even in just since 2021, it is 2021, right? Yes, 2021. So we even have 71 papers in the first 4 weeks of 2021. That's very exciting. So we're eager to see your publications appear, and you can see that there are quite a few other people who are now using NodeXL to, well, get the job done. So we are the Social Media Research Foundation, and we make these tools and we apply them. But we also support scholars in their use of the tool in an effort to create a kind of atlas of social cyberspace, that it's more of a job than any one of us can do, but working together, we can start to map the ways in which these exchanges in aggregate form social structures, because social media is all about somebody doing something with somebody. It's all about these connections between people. And when they do those things, they leave a lot of patterns behind, footprints in the sand, if you will. There are a lot of patterns and insights that can be gotten from these patterns. How many people, which way did they go? How long ago was it? Were they alone or in groups? Did they bring a wagon? Were they with animals? Was it dogs? Was it horses? You can learn a lot by looking at the footprints in the sand. And so what we want to do is make it so that the focus is on the link, the tie, the connection, rather than the individual per se. We care about individuals. They have great sets of attributes, but the things that really determine the value or importance of an individual is not really anything about them. It's about the relationships they have. And so most of the time that you're on the internet, which is most of the time these days, pretty much everything you do, every swipe and every tap is forming a link. You're liking and linking, and I'll just say them all. Reply, rate, review, favorite, friend, follow, forward, edit, tag, comment, check in, send, mention, all of those things. And isn't that most of what we do? Every time you do that, you're forming a connection, a tie, a link. And these links, on every platform. If you can't form a link between two users on a platform, then it's not social media. And so if we can address who did what with whom, when, and where, then we can actually get some insights. So for example, here, I think we are, yep, this is the right one. Let me go grab this over from screen 2. Here we have people who tweeted Smart Data Sprint, and there is a chance that some of you are on this screen. So let's see if we can, if any of us recognize ourselves. Oh, don't do that, do this, there we go. And we'll just lay that out again. And here we have it. Scale that down just a little bit, there we go. So here we're seeing all the people who recently tweeted Smart Data Sprint, And each of these people are in a box and they've got connections to other people. And if we wanted to, we can actually right click and open the Twitter page for that person. And so let's go do that in Firefox. And so now we're going straight to that person. And why that person? Because gosh, aren't they important? There they are. They're in the center of things. And notice that if we just mouse over, we get a little tooltip, and we've got the last tweet from that account displayed. And we can do that for all of the different accounts. And we will see a little bit about each of them. And we can always right click and open up the page for that person. And we'll always do that. There we go. And so we're jumping around and quickly identifying the most salient people. These are the people who are not just, they don't just have a lot of followers. They're the people at the center of this graph. There is Jana as number 2. There's the Inova Media Lab account. And then there's this person, F. Vandervist. And let's go take a look. So these are the people who are in our community who are the most influential because they occupy a position. Fernando Vandervilst, I may have mispronounced his last name and I apologize. So what we're doing is able to drill into this connected web of content and very quickly recognize that there are subgroups. They don't all use the same language. They're not all talking about the same thing. And we can produce this kind of a result really just by typing a query into this box. So I'm going to go scroll up here and see if I can find, let's see, datafied citizenship. I wonder if that's that common a term, but how about data and citizen? Will that be a reasonable query? I think maybe. I hit enter. We say getting page 810. It's going on and on and on. Each page is 100 tweets. And Twitter's never going to give us more than 18,000 tweets. And then we're going to, I guess that was a mistake. We now have hit the rate limit and we're gonna have to wait a little bit, but we're gonna eventually get all the data from data and citizen. And in a few minutes, we'll figure out who is the mayor of data and citizen. So what I think we could do is take a moment and maybe manually author a network. So this would be more for the folks who are like Diane Klein, who are producing a network from materials that they are editorially managing. So it's a more manual process, but this is also an approach that you could take if you were using survey research. So a common thing to do with networks is to say, I send you all an email and it has a link to a survey, and on that survey is a list of the other people who attended the Smart Data Sprint. And we ask you a question about each person. Maybe we ask 2 questions, very common. I sought out this person to achieve my goals, or this person sought me out to achieve their goals. And from that, if we ask everybody in the Smart Data Sprint that, what do you think would come back? I bet some of you know each other and some of you don't. And we might find that there are clusters. Maybe those clusters are based on national identity, maybe by language, maybe by disciplinary identity. Maybe all of the anthropologists are hanging out together. And so you could do that with a survey. You could do it with primary materials that you then manually encoded, just the way that Diane Klein did. Or we could do it just by hand by perhaps making stuff up. So let's imagine that we are now the anthropologists of, I was going to say dinner parties, but dinner parties are not COVID compliant. So maybe it's Zoom parties. So people are scheduling time with each other to get on Zoom and drink. It's not such a bad idea, I guess. And so maybe these are people who have invited each other to Zoom chats. That's a topical thing. And so we're going to start off with Anne, and Anne is a person, and Anne has had a Zoom chat with Bob, and there we're done. We have encoded a link, an edge, a bond, a tie, an association, a relationship. I have a dot here, I have a dot there, and I have an arrowhead, and that's one link. Now, we could say, but how long was the Zoom call? So we could add a column, we could call it duration. And let's just say this one was 37 minutes. And we're also going to say that, you know, Bob also has Zoom. We all have Zoom. And Bob had a Zoom call with Kathy. And that one only lasted 12 minutes. But Kathy also had a Zoom call, and her call was with David. And so far, everybody is like forming a line. There's no structure per se yet. There's just, you know, a chain of people have invited each other, and that's fine. It's a network. It's just a very simple network. And what we could do, though, is start to close the loop. So David could have a Zoom chat with Anne. And let's go make up some durations here. This was 49 minutes, and this was just 6 minutes. That one was a very short one. And so now we're going to find that if we refresh the graph, now it's got a loop, right? It's actually closed the loop. But maybe what we could do now is also have kind of a subgroup. There's Edward, and then Edward has a meeting with Faye, and Faye has a connection with Anne. And this was 102 minutes, and this was 5 minutes, and this was 44 minutes, and so on. So now we can now say, oh, look, you know, we have these two groups now. There's starting to be some structure in the graph. But we've now reached a point where it's kind of hard to figure out, well, who's who. And so we should now perhaps start to decorate the graph. And the button for decorating the graph is helpfully entitled Autofill Columns. And I guess we could call it Decorate the Graph. But there are technical reasons. So what we're going to do is tell it that vertex labels should be the name of the vertex. And we'll even say that it should have a tooltip, and that the label should have a position, and that this position is going to be, in every case, bottom center. And so we're now going to say autofill. And we should see that now there are names. But we haven't actually calculated any network metrics yet, so we don't have anything to rank people by. So let's go in here and we'll hit, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to go and calculate graph metrics. And in order to do that, we just go to NodeXL Pro, Analysis, Graph Metrics. Any second now. Now I'm stuck. All right. So the other key point to make is that there are a lot of these graph metrics. And in fact, there are a lot of things NodeXL does to a network. And it does them in a very particular order, because some of these metrics depend on prior metrics. And many of these things it does have themselves their own options, and those things can have their own options. And so we're now 3 layers deep, and this might be a little disheartening at this moment. You might be thinking, well, I got to learn all of this stuff. And there's a certain amount of value in knowing all of those things, but there's also this ability called options. And when we go to the NodeXL Pro options import, what I get is a lot of these things called, and we'll take a look at them sorted this way, NodeXL options files. And one is for Twitter user networks. We'll just use that one for the moment. It's not Twitter data, but it'll do. And these option files, you might want to use a different word for their recipes. And it's worth noting that we distribute the recipes from, where did you go? Here we are, the NodeXL page, Automate NodeXL Pro. Here we are in Social Media Research Foundation. I'll share this link with you all in the chat. This is where you go to get recipes. And we have 4 sets of recipes so far. We used to have 5, but we got rid of the Facebook stuff because Mr. Zuckerberg cut us out. But we have Twitter and YouTube and Wiki and Flickr. And we also have semantic networks. And you can download all of these recipes very easily and then unzip them. And what do you do with the recipes? Well, once they're unzipped and in a folder, all you have to do is go into Options, Import, find the file in question, open it. And what happens is all of these automate buttons are now set for you. You don't have to know how to set them. All you then have to do is, having selected a recipe, is then hit run. And it will now do to the data what the recipe tells it to do to the data. And it will do that entirely automatically. You don't have to be there. You don't have to stay there. You can even make this happen on a Windows machine in the middle of the night. You could make it happen 10 times before you wake up. And it can even email you the results in the morning. And so you could wake up to your machine has spent its night reading all of the prior day's tweets on 10 or 15 or 20 different topics. And it has generated reports for you, and it sent them to you, and you could wake up and, over your tea or coffee, you could gain what we like to think of as situational awareness over a relatively large data space, certainly larger than the 2,000 tweet limit that a human being who devotes hours of their day to keeping up with it, more than that. Because now you can fairly easily see, potentially dozens, if not maybe 100 of these topics and drill into them to ask the question, here's a good one. This is people talking about anti-vaccination, a very dangerous thought right now. Who are the mayors of anti-vax? Who are the leading voices in the anti-vax community? And the answer is these people. These are the leading anti-vax. These are the links related to anti-vax. And so these different ways of looking at this topic allow us to quickly gain an overview of what would have otherwise been I guess several days of effort to consume, and that's just over, so let's see, what was this? This is, okay, so this is 13 days, almost 14 days of anti-vax. So maybe you could keep up with it, but still might be easier. All right, well, thank you for anyone who has to go on to another session. Thank you for the time today. With that, I do note that we're now 90 minutes in. I think we have till the rest of this hour. Quick show of hands, who would like to have like a 5-minute break? Anybody interested in a 5-minute break? Okay, that's one. I'll take, very good, very good, very good. Okay, I currently have 7 minutes after the hour, approaching 8 minutes after the hour. Why don't we pause until, how about 15 minutes after the hour? Will that be good? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I will put my camera on hold for a moment and then I'll be right back and we'll start again in about at 9:15 or 15 past the hour. Howdy y'all. Everybody ready to start back up?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I've just placed a link in the chat. Oh, that was just to one person. Okay, let me try that again. I've just placed a link in the chat. And this is to our latest thing. And this is what we call NodeXL Pro Insights. And so this is a new add-on to NodeXL. So let's go back up here for a second. We'll take you to the Get NodeXL. We'll take you to the commercial side of our show for a moment. We are available for commercial users and we charge them as much as we can, but you guys are academics and many of you are students and we discount you a lot. But we also now offer this Insights thing, and Insights takes your NodeXL workbooks and it converts them into a web accessible version of the pages you see here. And when it does that, it means that you can actually get to that experience in any web browser. And so some of you needed our cloud edition because you're Mac users, or some people have older Office and it won't work, or they have a 4 GB Windows PC and it won't work. And so we have a cloud edition, and that solves a lot of problems. But we've also now made it so that you can publish the results in this format. And this format is not just maybe visually laid out in a more interesting way, but it also has a very interesting feature, and that is that everything is clickable. So I'll give you an illustration of that. I'm going to take us to the location page, and let's see, here's location. And so these are people, and I hope the topic will be relevant for some of you. This is the hashtag sustainability, which is discussions of things that don't necessarily completely eat out the ecological base of our human societies. What a radical notion. And what you'll see is that here we have a map of 11,459 people. They tweeted 15,000 or almost 15,000 times. What's the difference between a user and an author? Well, an author creates a message, but a user might have been mentioned in that message and conceivably never tweeted. And so sometimes presidents get talked about, but they don't talk. Imagine that. So we are seeing different kinds of participants. But this block over here, I think, is a great illustration of what this could be like. This is the client app display. And this shows Twitter for web. This is Twitter for Android. And this is Twitter for iPhone. And so what if we wanted to entertain a hypothesis? Those Android people are not like the rest. So we're going to click on Android, and now all of this data is now going to filter. All the numbers are going to change. All the hashtags, the domains, the locations, everything's going to filter. And we're only going to see the 2,400 Twitter for Android users. And we're also even going to see, did that change the geography? Did it change the content? Do they link to different things? For example, the top location just became India. That's interesting. It wasn't before. And so we could then click a different button. We could click Twitter for iPhone. Different top location, different URLs, different domains, different top people. And so, we can, of course, zoom in. We can decide, oh, well, I really only want to understand how do the Aussies talk about sustainability, and not just Aussies. It's those New South Wales folks that are really important to me. And so we could really drill into Melbourne and say, now show me just the tweets from the people in Victoria. Okay, that's fine. We're now going to filter everything and look at where the #1 location is, Melbourne. That's just good to see that worked out. And they all speak English and they're all using iPhone. This is made even more explicit on a page we call compare to, and we'll go jump over to that in just a second. Here we go. So in compare to, the page is set up as mirror images. And what you do is you select some criteria over on the left and then a different set of criteria on the right. And we immediately compare these two different populations. And so here we have people who are speaking, let's see what language this is. Let's see. That'll load in a second. And okay, unidentified, and then Italian, and then Japanese, and then German. And so we could say, well, in what way are Japanese users the same or different? And I'm now going to use the control key in order to select German. And so the second click has to be a control click, but now we're going to see German versus Japanese. And this could be the beginning of your conference poster, assuming that we ever have conferences with poster sessions again. I'm hopeful, you know, I miss the wine, I miss the cheese. So each of these pages is designed to be to facilitate a certain kind of analysis that allows you to drill down to specific content, specific people, specific locations, and identify them as interesting and important for your research in an effort to ensure that reviewer #2 does not have much traction. Why this data set? Why these people? Why this message? Why this time? Well, we would be able to say, well, they are the people at this quadrant. These are the people who have the most favorites and the most retweets. These are, I'm sorry to say, the tweets rather. And so this tweet might be the most important tweet because it had the most favorites and the most retweets. And we'll, of course, show you what that tweet is and who is it from and who did they mention and so on. So the role of this interface is to, let's see, let's go look at time, to take every dimension of social media. And social media has many dimensions. There are people, that's a dimension, or users, that's a dimension. But there's time, and there's groups, there's language, there's the technology being used, there's the kind of language being used, the positive and negative use. There are all these dimensions of data, the hashtags, the words, the URLs, time, location, username. And we want you to be able to move from the one to the other. Who uses sustainability and climate change? But who doesn't use the word innovation? That is a filter you can do with just a few clicks. And the aspiration is that you will then have facilitated 2 different research processes. One is discovery. You find a story to tell. And the other is presentation. You have the ability to tell the story. And so we would like there to be an army of scrutinizers, of auditors, of cultural accountants. We have this phrase, the marketplace of ideas. Has anybody ever heard the phrase, the marketplace of ideas? Okay, and so what we are arguing is that if there is in fact a marketplace of ideas, then there must be an accounting software
package for the marketplace of ideas. Because let's just do this as a thought experiment. Imagine what happens if you have a marketplace with no accounting. What would that be like? That rhetorical question, the answer I'll provide, rampant fraud, right? If there is a business community engaging in transactions and there is no independent entity that says, yeah, you really do have this much money, or yeah, you really do have this much in liabilities. If that were the case, then it would be, I think, very difficult to be able to invest reliably. And there is scholarship about the transition from what was before capitalism to capitalism. And what was before capitalism? It was called mercantilism. And what defined mercantilism? And the answer is marriage. Marriage defined mercantilism. If I wanted to do business with you, there was a really good chance that, you know, my son's going to have to marry your daughter or something like that, because other than the bonds of kinship, we don't really trust each other. And what happened after mercantilism? You found a mechanism for a kind of anonymous trust, contractual trust. I could figure out how valuable a business was because some accounting firm would step in, take a good look, and vouch for it. And I'll admit that that's a necessary but not sufficient condition for the absence of fraud. Because I'll share words like Enron, or WorldCom, or Arthur Andersen. Anybody remember those names? Enron, WorldCom, Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was the accounting company that certified the fraudulent results of WorldCom and Enron to the tune of many tens of billions of dollars. And so I guess I'm just saying, accounting, necessary, but not sufficient, but necessary. And so what would the marketplace of ideas be like if we had accountants? And that would be you. And what if we had a kind of accounting package for social media, for culture, for the marketplace of ideas? And that would be us. Because we're not about debits and credits, we're about from and to, but it's kind of like debits and credits. And it's a way of answering questions like, for this new idea, who are the leading proponents of this idea? And I'll give you an example. A scholar in Australia, Melissa Eaton, has been using NodeXL, and she studies fad diets. Fad diets. So keto, paleo, low carb, gluten-free, dairy-free. I've become more aware of this. I'm on the caffeine and sugar diet. So here we go. But one of the things that Melissa was able to show is that some of these discussions are really big, and you can certainly find them if we go to the NodeXL Graph Gallery. You'll find almost all of her work there. Like if we type in paleo, you get a lot of the dieting terms very quickly. Paleo, gluten-free, sugar-free, Atkins, LCHF, low carb, high fat. I think that's what that is, LCHF, diabetes, low carb. And so one of the things that the scholar Melissa did was she looked at the people who were the people at the center of talking about paleo, and she asked the question, how many of you have a degree in nutrition? None of them. None of them. So a couple of points to be made here. There is a marketplace of ideas. It currently is mostly unregulated. There is a marketplace of ideas, and there really isn't a well-developed marketplace for the software packages that study the marketplace of ideas. That can change. There's SAP, and there's, you know, IBM sells accounting software, and SAP is accounting software, and Oracle has accounting software. So there's rarely a pile of money anywhere on earth above, you know, more than couch money, spare change, that doesn't have software staring at it, looking at it, scrutinizing every penny in and out. And yet our culture is this marketplace of ideas. And in that marketplace, there is no accounting software. And so why does this matter? Well, because information has consequences. And it could be argued that what we have done is created an information system, yes, but not necessarily a high quality information system. So if you go and talk to the computer scientists, the network scientists, what you could get from conversation with them is that they care a lot about the fidelity of the information from point A going to point B. That if you had 100010001 over on one side, they want the exact same pattern over on the other side. But what they do not care about is whether or not that pattern is accurate. They just want it to move with fidelity. And so, it turns out that human beings don't really care if information is valid in order to care for the information. And how do we know that? Because Netflix exists. Or if you looked at, I don't know the last time you were in a bookstore. I haven't been in a bookstore in years. I used to like bookstores, but you know. But how much of a bookstore is fiction versus nonfiction? My argument is 80 to 90% fiction. If you open up Netflix, 80 to 90% fiction. If you look at what's on people's screens most of the time, fiction. And so how valuable is information about things that are completely not true? Very valuable. How valuable? $4 billion for Star Wars. So I hate to break this for anybody on the call, but there are no Jedi. There are no lightsabers. There was no galaxy far, far away a long time ago. There is no Death Star. There is no Darth Vader. How much of our, I know it's shocking, but how much of our brains are filled up with complete fiction, right? It's just stories. None of it happens. None of it's true. There is no faster than light this. There are no sentient robots. There are no levitating things with your minds. There are no small puppets with, you know, green ears that, you know, none of it's true. How much money, time, and effort is focused on invalid but high quality information? So validity and quality have nothing to do with each other. And we are now in this moment where truth is like beauty. You know, it's in the eye of the beholder. And we had this great line in American politics. I think a guy named Patrick Moynihan back in the 60s or 70s said, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. Turns out that statement is an opinion, right? Because everybody's entitled to their own facts. Facts are about consensus. If you can get enough people to agree, it's true for them. And we have this line in sociology that things are real in their consequences. W.I. Thomas, back in the old days in the Chicago School of Sociology in the 1930s, there's a great book called The Polish Peasant, in which he writes about all these people who showed up in the United States from 1880 to about 1910. And we had an enormous, I guess it ended in about 1928. We closed the door on the rest of the world. But until that point, you know, we had literally millions of what were at the time just, you know, peasants. They were people who lived on the land. They were not urbanites. They were not cosmopolitan. And his question was, why do they believe some crazy stuff? Like the evil eye. They believe that somebody can give you a hex. And the point the sociologists make, W.I. Thomas, is, you know, if you believe it and you act on it as if it were real, then the consequences are real. even if the thing itself is not. Like inflation, it's not real, but everybody's afraid of it. So we are now faced with the fact that facts have become politicized, weaponized, and they have consequence. The message, don't wear a mask, is a very dangerous one. COVID is a fraud. Very dangerous. And, no doubt none of us would ever agree with that kind of stuff, but there are plenty of people out there. And this is the consequence, that there is this moment of the weaponization of social media for the collective creation of delusion. And of course, the collective creation of delusion is the primary function of the internet. What is the Mandalorian but a delusion? It's the most popular thing on Netflix or wherever it is. And everybody loves this thing. And none of it, like what percentage of the Mandalorian is factually accurate? 0, right? None of it. And so the tool that tells us stories is the tool that we're using to tell ourselves stories. Imagine. It just happens to be that these other stories have real consequence in the world, the way that, the story about some Star Wars guy doesn't, except to the extent that it gets us ready to believe things that aren't true and spend a lot of our time and effort. So this guy had something to do with it. You may remember him. I forget his name. He was a political official in the United States for a few years back. Thankfully, that ended. And so I will make this observation. The actual architecture of the platforms contribute to the problem, in the same way that automobiles contributed to the problem of automobile fatalities before they had airbags, roll bars, safety belts, and that kind of thing. They contributed to the problem, and they still do. I mean, I'll note that in the United States, something on the order of 40,000 people will lose their lives this year in automobile accidents, and something about 250,000 will be grievously injured in those automobile accidents. They'll survive, but so 300,000 people very harmed, and about 40 or 50,000 of them dead. And that's for a relatively mature technology that now there are seatbelts, now there are airbags, but there weren't always. And so here we have the information superhighway. And where are the seatbelts? Where are the airbags? And the real problem is there's only a gas pedal. There's no brake pedal. You can only retweet. You can't untweet something. You can only amplify. You cannot diminish. And so it is said that a rising tide lifts all boats, but I think we've all learned that some boats rise faster than others. And this is the boat that's dedicated to making it up as it goes along. And this is the one that says, but facts matter. Because these people don't have to fact check. And so it isn't a uniform process. We don't all rise at the same time. And so I'm going to make this argument in our wrap up here that there are 3 things necessary to essentially domesticate information networks. And that is detection, deflection, and deterrence. Detection is when you know you're under attack. Deflection is what you do as a result. And deterrence is having a counter response so severe that people don't bother to attack you in the first place. And I've labeled that with a question mark because I'm an American, and this is sort of like the nuclear weapons idea, and we're all for it. The more the better, so long as you don't have them and we do, we like it that way. But I did put a check mark here because I think detection is morally very defensible. You have a right to know. Deflection is empty, not because it's morally indefensible, but because we don't really have any idea what that looks like. If I tell you, you are being attacked right now, what do you do about it? And then what, right? And then, of course, deterrence, I think that's the idea that, if Mr. Putin is sitting there going, hey, we're going to mess up American politics more, we say, would you like to see Mr. Navalny become a cult leader? We can make that happen. And, maybe you would like to back down then because, in the same way that we have mutually assured destruction on the nuclear weapons front, we would have some kind of mutually assured destruction on the social media epistemological battlefront. So you may be familiar with this social scientist, Jane Jacobs, who said that a social space is a good social space when you have a mix of people who essentially provide mutual surveillance. That there's somebody keeping an eye on the street who notices, wait, the people who are taking that piano out of your house, that's not their piano, that's your piano. I'm going to call the police. Without this sense of having people around all the time, different people, different times, all willing to engage in community, then you don't have a domesticated space. You have a space that is open to rampant fraud and abuse. And so we have to balance our responses to the weaponization of social media, because there is this temptation, and this is the throw baby out with bathwater, and this is restraints on free speech. This would be the idea that you're going to need a license to post that to Facebook, or pay money to cover your liability if it turns out to be fraudulent or in some way incendiary or illegal in some way. And so we don't really want to stop people, but we also don't want to do this. This is leaving the castle gates open when, the enemy is at the gates. And so we need to find a balance somewhere that does penalize low quality and dangerous speech while enabling the diversity of speech that we want. And so it is the case that social media makes a promise that all may speak, but it does not make the promise that all may be heard. And so what we could do is give the power of, you might call it censorship, I would call it editorship or curation. What if we gave that power to more users and let you decide who those editors should be? And so I might think, hey, the ACLU is not just somebody I'm following, they're my editor. And what do editors get to do? Editors get to block the display of tweets. And so if the Southern Poverty Law Center comes across tweets that are racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, maybe because they're in a couple of time zones before me, they wake up and they delete them ahead of time, and I never see them. Now, what about censorship? Well, here's TransCanada, and they really like oil, and they like oil pipelines, and maybe they don't like Greenpeace. And I find that they are censoring messages that I do find valuable, and so I unselect them as my editor. And a kind of market for editors could emerge. And so what we need to ask ourselves is, are we storing our digital information in a data bank? Or is it a data casino? And you'll know it's a casino when you can't make a withdrawal with interest. And if you go to Facebook and you say, I'd like all my data, Facebook is very particular in how it replies, because it will give you your data and only your data, which is to say none of the likes, none of the loves, none of the comments, none of the replies, none of the interest. The very thing you put your data into a data bank to earn interest, you don't get your interest. And so try going to a casino and saying, I gave you money last month and now I want it back, and they're going to laugh at you. That's not what happens here. This is not a deposit that you earn interest on. This is a wager. And what do you wager in Facebook and these other platforms? You would like to win the advertising lottery. You would like to be Ice Bucket Challenge 2.0. You would like to get millions of dollars of advertising for nothing. And guess what? We're not doing that anymore. We're not doing it. It's a presumption that it still exists, but it does not still exist. So when you go to a bank, you're likely to be able to get your withdrawal on demand. And when you go to a casino, not so much. So what we're looking for is the emergence of these things. We would like there to be data banks, because I did take 20 years of digital photographs of my children, and that is an asset that has value. And I did share 3,000 of them with my family, and I do think their interest was valuable. That's why I shared them. And I want a reliable way to have and collect, store, protect, and withdraw that information. And so we now need tools that will enable this. And in order to do that, we think you're going to need an accounting package in order to be able to determine whether or not these are in fact data banks or not. And very much like the stock market, we've just seen this GameStop thing. Perhaps you've seen the news about GameStop. A lot of people on Reddit got together, made the price go up, and then it went down. And this is called pump and dump. And the same thing is happening not with financial securities, but cultural assets, like don't wear a mask or COVID is a fraud. And to the extent that, COVID is a fraud is itself a fraud, but that fraud may in fact rise. And in the same way that financial regulators keep an eye on these marketplaces, we too should keep an eye on these cultural marketplaces. So I think that's my wrap-up point. Yeah, that's my wrap-up point. And so here are many of the other scholars making use of our tool, among others. And I guess with that, I would be happy to take any questions, queries, comments, concerns. And I'm also happy to arrange times for one-on-one sessions after our call today, to make sure that the tool is working for you and that you can do the recipe thing with the automation. But once you're all set up with that, typically people are able to produce these reports in, within a single 90-minute session. So with that, let me hand it over to you all and see if there are any points of discussion or questions for clarification. All right.
Everyone is so quiet. They're probably like absorbing everything.
Oh. Well, very good. So I'm Marc with a C, M-E-R-C, at SMR Foundation. I'll type that here. And we want to hear from scholars. We would really like to see your paper appear in Google Scholar as one of the new ones for 2021. And we think that well-functioning cultural marketplaces need scrutinizers in the same way that well-functioning financial marketplaces need scrutinizers. And there may even be a revenue model, right? Anybody heard of the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers? And then there were the football leaks, and that's a very Portuguese topic, the football leaks. When those releases took place, there are financial scrutinizers who go through that material and they are looking for information to trade on. Like, oh, these people are cheating. That must mean their financial position is not as strong as they appear, because who cheats to make themselves look weaker? Oh, I should short that stock, which we know is now evil, I guess, but whatever. But I'm saying that there can be a sustainable model in which people are rewarded for finding cultural malfeasance. And that might mean, oh, well, the people who, I'm in the United States, I have a feeling our mini-series, America Let's Go Crazy has been playing in your local TV sets. You know, the hashtag Stop the Steal. That's a kind of like coronavirus of the mind. It can infect you. And if you believe the election was fraudulent, well, that's an interesting belief, but it's a fabricated belief. And being able to walk back to who started this belief, where did it come from? How were the flames fanned? That's what we want to know. Because then we want to go and publish in major national newspapers, hey, we did a forensic analysis. And it looks like Stop the Steal came from that guy, this guy, and that guy. And lo and behold, none of them are nutrition specialists. Oop, not that. You know, none of them have any credentials in that. They're not election officials. How do they know? And so can we increase the costs of fabrication of that boat that's all the way out front? Maybe we can put an anchor on it, and maybe we can put some jet skis on that little raft and make it go faster. And that's our goal. The machines have gotten us into this problem. The machines are going to have to get us out of it if we can figure out how to program the machines to do that. And I think they can. I think we just need to augment the human scrutinizer. And along the way, there's a lot of publications. We do like to refer to NodeXL as dissertation in a box, just add graduate student. And we're happy to have the conversations about how to use the tool to frame a research framework so that there are, for example, comparisons over time or between different topics. How does, let's say, green energy compare to natural gas? There is a hashtag NATGAS, nat gas. Or there's another one, oil and gas. And this is the hashtag for people talking about oil and gas, and compare that to solar panel or green energy. And you would have, I think, the beginnings of a cultural evaluation of in what ways are social media being used to talk about this versus that. The phrase I like is, what do we talk about when we talk about X, right? And this is a way of doing the meta-analysis of a discussion and then comparing to meta-analyses in a way that might allow you to write a paper a week. I mean, I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying, this starts having a kind of rhythm where it's relatively easy to point it in different locations, take a bunch of pictures, and assemble a research project that is, well, let's describe them and compare them. Description and comparison. It's always a good thing. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And we need you to achieve that because we can't do it ourselves. We really need you all to pick the topic and pick the tool and put it together and push that into the literature so that we can actually have more trustworthy marketplaces.